This is my video for Digital Media Studio Term 2 assignment. In this video, I will explain my decisions, processes, and setbacks when creating my game. Once I got my design ideas together, I then went to create my terrain. To create this, I used the program World Machine. This is free to use as long as you are not selling your game. This was the finished version of the terrain that I created. You can see that there are different colours for different parts of the level. I'll show you how I manage this. When exporting my terrain from World Machine, I created 5 different channels. This means that Unreal can interpret them as different things. I then created a material and assigned 5 different colours, 1 for each layer. When the terrain is imported, this then applies the colour onto the terrain in the appropriate areas, making a realistic terrain. Once I had imported the landscape into Unreal, I then set about creating the rooms and placing them where I wanted them to be on the terrain. Originally, I was going to link the rooms via tunnels that the player would run down. However, I realised that this would not look as aesthetically pleasing on the landscape, so I decided to use teleporters in which the player would run slightly out of the room into a teleporter which would then transport them to the next room. This makes for a much smoother gameplay experience as there is no time waiting between each room. The short narrative I created involved the player playing as a lab experiment. There would be a natural disaster in which the player's doors would unlock and open. This would then leave the player free to try escape from the lab. They would have to go from room to room passing different challenges to try escape the island. Originally, there were going to be 3 routes. However, due to time constraints as well as difficulty, I opted to focus on one route which the player could then play through, with the next 2 routes being added in later versions. The first challenge that I created was a Sudoku challenge, in which the player can select each block and then input the numbers. Once solving the Sudoku, they can press check answer, and that will verify the Sudoku. If it is correct, the door behind will open. The next challenge that I created was a riddles challenge, still on the theme of maths. You are teleported to a room full of lava, in which you see no way to cross and only a button to press. If you press the button, you are given a few riddles. If you answer the riddles correctly, then a bridge will come up. If you answer the riddle wrong, it will choose another random riddle out of the ones you have not yet answered correctly. The final task that I have added is a calculating task. A random number is generated on the side, and the random starting number is generated. Using the starting number, you must get up to that number that has been created. Use F to interact with the buttons on the keypad. Once you have completed this, the bridge will appear and you can move on to the next chapter. Once you have finished the final tasks, you are teleported to a pier. To finish the game, you must move towards the boat that is on the pier, interact with the boat, and the ending cutscene will play. My game is a speedrunning game, which times how long it takes the player to beat it. Each task is timed, meaning that there are 4 high scores, 1 for each task and also 1 for finishing the game. To do this, whenever the player steps through a teleporter to the next area, the time is saved if it beats the current high score. Which time is saved is based on an integer value which is used in a switch statement. This value is set on each instance of the teleporter that is in the game. I also added a small timer to the UI so the player knows how long they have taken for their run. For my game, I've created a simple UI in which the player can access the high scores. If there is no high score, then it will display that there are no high scores. However, once a high score has been beaten, it will then display here. The player can either quit the game from here, or they can play the game, and I have added a pseudo loading screen, which does not function as a normal loading screen. However, the screen is switched just before it loads the level, creating a trick of a loading screen. To save high scores between levels, I have created my own instance, and any variables I wish to pass through, I save to this instance, for example high scores. When the high scores button is clicked, it will check the instance to make sure there are no updated values. Similar to when the time is saved, the time would be saved to the instance from the game. I have also added a simple audio player into my game. I have added 5 audio components onto this player. It begins by playing the first song, and then once each song finishes, it will move on to the next and loop back to the beginning if the end song finishes. I have also used a line trace in order to check whether the player is aiming at a certain object. If they are aiming at a certain object that is interactable, the user can press F to interact with it. If they manage to hit an actor that they can interact with, then it will play a particular sound. However, if they cannot interact with anything that they are aiming at, it will play a different sound to alert the player. I used a second line trace, which is repeated on the event tick, to check if the player is actually aiming at something. If they are aiming something that they can interact, then a variable is set to true, which the UI picks up on and displays text letting the user know that they can interact with the object. However, if they are not aiming at something they can interact with, then this is disabled and the text disappears. I have added some simple interaction with the lava in my level. Since this is a speedrunning game, it would do the user no good if they were to die and have to start from the beginning. So instead of doing this, I have had a delay for whenever the user falls in lava, that this will teleport them back to the beginning of that room after 2 seconds. I have included 2 different post-processing volumes onto the lava room. When the player is in the room as normal, the player's display will alter between yellow and orange. However, if they fall into the lava, it will then turn red to indicate they are dying and will be teleported back. I have added a cutscene to the end of my game that I've created by making a level sequence. This level sequence simply moves the camera to turn around and make a big view of the terrain. However, the movement done by the boat in the cutscene has been scripted. First of all, inside the boat, there's a script that checks the time that the player had to complete the game. If they beat the high score, then it will update the high score. However, the second function will end the game. So it will play the level sequence, and then after a delay which matches the length of the level sequence, it will open the main menu again. A third function then causes the boat to move forward whilst the cutscene is playing, which you can see. And then the final function that I've added sets a white sphere on the boat to become visible. As I did not have a player model that could be seen in third person, I created a small white circle. You'll notice in my game that the only foliage that I have included are trees. I was originally going to include grass as well. However, due to my game being an indoor level, and the closest that you come to seeing outside is this far, I chose not to include the grass as it was not necessary and would likely not be seen due to render distances. This also improves the performance of the overall game. I will now cover the troubles that I came upon when creating my game. The first issue that I encountered was a lighting issue. Originally, I had closed-top buildings with lights illuminating the inside. However, when the lighting was built, the lights from the outside would leak in through the corners, no matter how I arranged the roofs. To solve this, I decided to have glass roofs, which would allow light through. I have created a transparent material and applied it to the top blocks, meaning that the sunlight illuminates the set rather than fabricated light, which resolved my issue. Another issue I encountered was issues using my raycasting that I was using to detect what the user was aiming at. Originally for my timing, I had volumes set up in each room so that when the player entered that volume, it would save the time. However, this meant that on my raycast, it would interact with every volume that I was in, constantly triggering an interaction option. However, this meant that I could not select anything within the volumes. To solve this, I changed the timing to use teleporters rather than a volume, meaning that there was nothing to interact with, fixing the problem. The final issue I had, I only discovered whilst recording. When creating the game, I created it on my laptop, which uses a 60Hz monitor. However, when recording, I recorded it on my desktop, which primarily has a 144Hz monitor. When I used any timelines, using the update function to move something, instead of using alert for some things, I'd use just an update function which would move the block. However, I did not realise that this update function was called more often with a higher refresh rate, meaning that things such as my bridge in my lava room, whilst recording, were out of place. However, when viewing the game on a standard monitor, this is not the issue.